Good evening, dear companions. Tonight we shall embark upon a deliberate and tender expedition into the venerable Greek myths and the hushed murmurs of voices long since passed into antiquity. These are narratives that have resonated across the ages, soft and patient in their endurance, awaiting precisely such moments as this present gathering. I invite you to lower your illumination, nestle comfortably beneath your chosen coverlet, and permit the cacophony of the day to gently recede. Now, with the lights suitably dimmed, perhaps activate a fan to generate that subtle ambient hum, and let us commence our serene perambulation through the majestic mountains of ancient Greece, where sylvan nymphs once confided their secrets to the passing breezes. You now find yourself situated upon a mountainside in that venerable land, where the morning mist still clings tenaciously to the verdant pine trees, and the very air is redolent with the fragrance of wild herbs and fresh dew. It was here, in this idyllic setting, that Echo made her abode, long before her essence was reduced to merely a vocal reverberation bouncing off the unyielding canyon walls. In those nascent days, she was a mountain nymph, her delicate feet seeming to scarcely graze the earth, and possessing a voice so exquisitely melodic that it could coax even the most reticent birds from their leafy nests. Echo possessed a singular aptitude, a particular gift of gab, which regrettably led her into a considerable predicament. She possessed an unparalleled capacity for discourse, an ability to converse at length, seemingly without cessation. It was not, one must clarify, in a harsh or disagreeable manner. Indeed, her voice was utterly enchanting, imbued with a musicality akin to the gentle murmur of water flowing over polished river stones. However, once Echo commenced her verbal expressions, she discovered it almost insurmountable to bring them to a halt. Envision her on any given morning, comfortably seated upon a sun-warmed boulder, engaged in lively repartee with her sister mountain nymphs, while her companions might offer a fleeting observation or two concerning the prevailing weather, or perhaps allude to which shepherd had been coaxing the most mellifluous melodies from his rustic flute. Echo would invariably embark upon elaborate and expansive narratives. She would meticulously delineate every cloud adorning the cerulean expanse, every blossom unfurling in the verdant meadow, every intriguing shadow cast by the ancient oak trees. Her fellow nymphs, to be fair, held no genuine objection. Echo's tales were undeniably diverting, replete with intricate minutiae that unfailingly elicited smiles. She possessed a remarkable faculty for discerning particulars that others often overlooked. The delicate manner in which a butterfly momentarily paused to cleanse its iridescent wings, or the subtle chromatic shifts in the light as it permeated through the variegated foliage. Yet there was one Olympian deity who perceived Echo's incessant garrulousness as rather inconvenient. Hera, the august consort of Zeus, had cultivated a profound suspicion of mountain nymphs. You see, Zeus harbored a notorious predilection for absconding from the celestial heights of Mount Olympus to dally with various nymphs, and Hera had, in turn, honed a formidable talent for tracing his whereabouts. She would invariably materialize at a secluded mountain grove or a sylvan clearing, fully prepared to apprehend Zeus in flagrante delicto, whatever his current mischievous endeavor might entail. But Echo, entirely without malicious intent, had inadvertently become Zeus's unwitting yet perfect confederate. Whenever Hera made her formidable appearance, radiating an aura of stern resolve and purposeful determination, Echo would invariably greet her with unbridled cheerfulness. "O most radiant Hera, What an utterly magnificent morning this truly is. Have you observed how the sunlight exquisitely catches the delicate dewdrops upon that intricate spiderweb? And do listen to that avian melody. I believe it to be a thrush, though it is conceivable it could be a lark. The timbre of its song is subtly distinct from yesterday's enchanting dawn chorus. By the time Echo had concluded her effervescent observations concerning the nascent day, Zeus had, with practiced stealth, quietly slipped away, leaving Hera to offer a polite, if strained, smile to the loquacious nymph, while her intended quarry once again made his discreet escape. This sequence of events transpired not merely once, but on numerous occasions. In fact, it occurred with sufficient frequency that Hera began to harbor a profound suspicion that Echo was acting with deliberate intent. The unvarnished truth, however, was far simpler. Echo possessed a genuine and profound affection for conversation, and she was genuinely delighted to encounter anyone, even an occasionally irascible goddess, upon her beloved mountain. But Hera had finally reached the absolute limit of her patience with these clever stratagems of delay and convenient diversions. One particular morning, after Zeus had, yet again, vanished into thin air while Echo was meticulously describing the captivating manner in which the morning shadows traversed the valley, Hera turned to the still chattering nymph with a definitive resolution firmly etched in her mind. "Echo," she pronounced, and there was an ominous quality in her voice that compelled the mountain nymph to finally cease her discourse. "You appear to cherish words with such fervent devotion, but from this moment forth, you shall only be capable of employing the words that others have first bestowed upon you." It was a malediction uttered with the full force of divine authority, and it descended upon Echo like a suffocating shroud. She parted her lips to protest, to articulate that she had intended no harm, that she simply relished the act of conversation, but no utterance emerged. She could only remain, listening intently, ardently hoping that someone else would speak, so that she might appropriate their words and artfully reconfigure them into her own responsive expression. The other nymphs initially failed to comprehend the gravity of the situation. They called out to Echo, inquiring what affliction troubled her, why she appeared so profoundly distressed. And Echo, in her newfound plight, could only reiterate their very questions back to them. What was wrong? Why did she look distressed? But she possessed no means by which to elucidate her predicament. Days slowly elapsed. Echo gradually assimilated the frustrating constraints of her new existence. She could seize the final few words uttered by another and return them. However, she was utterly incapable of initiating conversations, unable to impart her astute observations concerning the shifting light or the intriguing configurations of the clouds. The mountain itself seemed to acquire a newfound quietude, a palpable sense of loneliness, even though she remained encompassed by the very same sisters she had always known. It was during this period, as she grappled with the profound adjustments of living with an enforced silence, that Narcissus made his fateful appearance upon her mountain. He was, by estimation, 16 or perhaps 17 years of age, endowed with a countenance of such striking beauty that it compelled onlookers to pause and gaze in rapt admiration. His hair seemed to capture the very sunlight, shimmering like spun gold, and his eyes possessed the deep blue-green hue of pristine mountain lakes. He traversed the forest with an innate grace, moving as if he were an intrinsic part of the wild landscape, confident and effortlessly elegant. Yet there was an inherent coolness to his striking beauty, an almost untouchable quality. When other young individuals endeavored to cultivate his acquaintance, he would regard them with a mild, almost imperceptible disdain, as though they were somehow beneath his exalted notice. When they openly declared their admiration or professed their burgeoning affection, he would let out a laugh, not precisely cruel, but imbued with a dismissiveness that invariably left them feeling diminished and utterly foolish. Echo observed him from her vantage point upon the mountainside and experienced an emotion she had never before encountered. It was not solely his exquisite beauty that captivated her, though he was, unequivocally, a vision to behold. It was, rather, the manner in which he navigated her beloved forest with such effortless self-assurance, the profound sense that he belonged inherently to these untamed domains that she held so dear. She followed him with meticulous care, moving quietly, endeavoring to conceive of a strategy to approach someone when her only means of communication was through borrowed words. She watched him kneel by a limpid stream to quench his thirst, observed him pause to meticulously examine a particularly rare and unusual flower. He appeared so utterly absorbed in his own profound cogitations, so completely content within his own solitary company. Finally, he became aware of being observed. "Who's there?" he called out, turning his gaze towards the dense thicket of trees where Echo lay concealed. "There," Echo replied, for those were the sole words made accessible to her. Narcissus furrowed his brow, scanning his surroundings with increased vigilance. "Come out," he commanded. "Show yourself." "Show yourself," Echo echoed, stepping partially into view, yet maintaining a sufficient distance that he could not discern her features with perfect clarity. This peculiar conversation persisted for several agonizing minutes, with Narcissus growing progressively more exasperated and Echo descending into a deepening state of desperation. She yearned to elucidate her identity, to recount to him the wonders of the mountain, to share with him all the exquisite details she had noticed during his traverse through her forest. But her curse confined her to merely echoing his own pronouncements back to him. When she finally emerged fully into the clearing, revealing her entire form, Narcissus regarded her with the very same cold dismissal he had previously shown to all others. She was undeniably beautiful, as mountain nymphs invariably were, yet he appeared utterly unmoved by her loveliness, entirely disinterested in her palpable admiration. "I have no time for games," he declared, and promptly turned to depart. "Time for games," Echo repeated desperately, extending a hand towards him, but he was already striding away, leaving her utterly alone in the clearing with only his borrowed words and the profound ache of rejection. She watched him vanish amidst the trees, carrying with him the nascent stirrings of love she had ever felt, entirely oblivious to the precious gift he was so carelessly spurning. From that day forward, Echo commenced a slow and inexorable decline, not abruptly, but gradually, like the ephemeral morning mist touched by the encroaching sunlight. Her sister nymphs observed with escalating concern as their companion became increasingly translucent, spending her days perched upon rocks and craggy cliffs, staring wistfully into the boundless distance. She was progressively transforming into that which profound grief and unrequited longing can fashion us into when we possess no verbal outlet for our torment. A voice devoid of a corporeal form, an echo without an original, originating sound. Soon, all that remained of the vibrant nymph who had once filled the mountain with her cheerful and continuous chatter was her ethereal voice, condemned to perpetually repeat the final utterances spoken by others. However, this narrative does not conclude quite yet, does it? For Narcissus continued his solitary wanderings, persisting in his established pattern of cold rejection, never truly comprehending that the root of the problem lay not with those who offered him their affection, but rather with his own inherent inability to love anyone but himself, and the vigilant gods, ever attentive to such mortal failings, were meticulously taking note of his consistent behavior. What then do you surmise transpires when an individual utterly incapable of love encounters their very own reflection? The day was steadily growing warmer, and he had been ascendant, steadily climbing uphill through a dense, interwoven forest. His tunic adhered uncomfortably to his back with perspiration, and his throat felt parched and scratchy. When he detected the faint sound of water ahead, not the tumultuous rush of a vigorous stream, but rather the more placid sound of water gently lapping against smooth stones, he experienced an immediate surge of profound relief. Narcissus had been walking for countless hours without truly registering where his feet were leading him. This was his customary modus operandi. He moved through the world, perpetually focused inward, immersed in his own thoughts, admiring his own inherent grace, barely registering the surrounding beauty, unless it somehow served to reflect his own image. That profound question concerning reflection now guides us deeper into the heart of the forest, where the ancient trees grow exceptionally thick and the sunlight filters down in resplendent golden columns, thereby creating an immersive world that feels utterly distinct from the ordinary currents of time. Such natural springs were a common sight throughout the craggy Greek mountains, consistently replenished by subterranean streams that ensured the water remained impeccably fresh and refreshingly cool, even amidst the most sweltering summer heat. These pristine oases were frequently regarded as hallowed grounds, believed to be inhabited by graceful nymphs, or serving as sites where weary travelers might leave modest votive offerings, seeking divine favor for their arduous journeys. The particular pool Narcissus chanced upon exhibited a flawless circularity, as if meticulously carved from the earth by some colossal implement. It nestled within a secluded glade, where the surrounding trees formed an encompassing natural amphitheater, their boughs extending inward, their outermost branches almost touching overhead, creating an intimate canopy. The water within was so remarkably tranquil and undisturbed that its surface resembled burnished bronze, reflecting the azure sky and verdant foliage with crystalline precision. However, Narcissus harbored no thoughts concerning the sacred nature of such locations, nor did he ponder the existence of nymphs or the significance of offerings. His sole perception was that of pure, accessible water, for which he felt an immediate, profound gratitude. He gracefully knelt at the pool's periphery, resting upon the smooth, time-worn stones that encircled it. Cupping his hands together, he indulged in a deep, satisfying draught. The water was exquisitely cold and remarkably sweet, providing the exact replenishment his parched body desperately craved. It was in this moment of physical relief, as he lowered his gaze, that Narcissus first beheld the captivating visage in the pool. A youthful, extraordinarily beautiful face adorned with golden hair that shimmered in the dappled sunlight, and eyes the profound hue of ancient forest depths. His initial reaction was not one of self-recognition, a simple, "Ah, that is I." Instead, a question immediately formed in his mind. Who is this magnificent being, and what purpose do they serve within these waters? One might reasonably assume that Narcissus would instantaneously identify his own reflection. Yet, it is crucial to recall that this era predated the widespread availability of mirrors. While denizens of ancient Greece occasionally caught fleeting glimpses of themselves in highly polished bronze or silver, such reflective surfaces were prohibitively expensive and exceedingly rare. Consequently, most individuals navigated their entire lives possessing only an imprecise notion of their physical appearance, gleaned from casual descriptions offered by others or brief, indistinct moments observing still water. It was only after he paused, drawing a deep breath to compose himself, that he truly discerned the face gazing back at him from the tranquil surface of the pool. "Greetings," he murmured softly to the ethereal face in the water. He tentatively shifted his head, and in perfect synchronicity, the face within the water replicated the motion. He then raised his hand, and the hand in the reflection ascended correspondingly. For a fleeting instant, a glimmer of understanding almost pierced his consciousness. Yet the face before him was so exquisitely lovely, so utterly perfect, that he found it impossible to reconcile it with his own image. Instead, he convinced himself that he was encountering a water nymph, one of the enchanting, mythical entities fabled to inhabit the myriad springs and pools scattered throughout the mountainous terrain. This plausible explanation accounted for the unparalleled beauty, the mysterious emergence, and the uncanny way the figure seemed to exist just beneath the water's surface. Impulsively, he extended his hand towards the water, yearning to make contact with that flawless countenance, only for his fingers to disrupt the placid surface, instantly shattering the captivating image into radiating ripples. Frantically, he withdrew his hand, his gaze fixed upon the disturbed water, impatiently awaiting its return to stillness, for the resplendent face to reemerge. When it did, he offered a tentative smile, and the reflection responded in kind, a radiant expression that caused his heart to quicken its beat. Never in his life had he witnessed such unparalleled beauty, such absolute perfection. In comparison to this exquisite creature, every individual who had ever professed affection for him now seemed utterly mundane and unremarkable. This, he mused, was the very essence of true beauty. The lips in the reflection moved, seemingly whispering in return, though no audible sound reached his ears. This silent exchange only served to solidify his conviction that he was observing a shy nymph, perhaps one whose mode of communication was limited solely to gestures. When the image stabilized and smiled back, he felt such an overwhelming sense of relief that a soft laugh almost escaped him. "Fear not," he gently whispered. "I intend no harm." Hours elapsed, unnoticed by Narcissus. So completely engrossed was he in his newfound fascination. He exhaustively explored every conceivable method of communication with the elusive water nymph, desperately striving to persuade her to emerge from her watery abode and engage in proper conversation. He employed an array of gestures, uttered soft, coaxing words, and even attempted a melodic song, an unprecedented act he had never considered performing for any of the mortal men or women who had previously pursued him. Once more, the lips in the reflection moved, forming silent words. The eyes, however, gazed directly into his with an expression of such profound longing, such perfect, empathetic understanding, that he felt an overwhelming sensation, as if his very heart might burst from the intensity of the connection. As the sun traversed its arc across the heavens, casting an ever-shifting tapestry of light and shadow around the secluded pool. Narcissus's desperation intensified. This, he now recognized with startling clarity, was genuine love. This profound, aching yearning, this pervasive sensation that nothing else in the world held any significance save for proximity to this singular, perfect individual. This was precisely the emotion all those other suitors had attempted, often clumsily, to articulate to him. Yet, with each attempt to reach out and touch her, his fingers merely fragmented her image into fleeting ripples. With every lean forward, intending to bestow a kiss, his lips encountered only the cold, unyielding water. She was undeniably present, her form distinct and clear, responding to his every expression with an uncanny, flawless comprehension. But she remained maddeningly impossible to touch, impossible to embrace. However, comprehending the nature of love and possessing the means to satisfy its demands proved to be two vastly divergent realities. He found himself utterly incapable of departing from the pool's edge. Each time the thought of leaving crossed his mind, he would instinctively glance down at that resplendent face and perceive what appeared to be an unmistakable flicker of panic in those perfect eyes. She needed him, he convinced himself. Clearly, she was endeavoring to convey something of immense importance. If he were to abandon her now, he might forever lose the opportunity to find her again. Days bled into weeks in this agonizing fashion. He only permitted himself to drink from the pool when the gnawing pangs of thirst became unbearable, always exercising extreme caution to disturb the water's pristine surface as little as possible. He dozed fitfully, his head resting uncomfortably on his arms. Yet he invariably awoke with a start, compelled to verify that his beloved reflection remained steadfastly present. The sun would set, giving way to twilight, and still he knelt by the water. His knees became painfully stiff from the unyielding stones beneath him. His back ached relentlessly from the constant forward lean, but an irresistible force prevented him from tearing himself away. Under the ethereal glow of the moonlight, the face in the water assumed an even more otherworldly, more profoundly magical aspect, deepening his enchantment. The vigilant nymphs of the surrounding forest observed this peculiar vigil with mounting disquiet. They recognized the unmistakable hallmarks of a divine curse, the relentless obsession, the visible wasting away of his physical form, and the utter detachment from every aspect of life that had once sustained him. Some among them whispered their conviction that this fate was a just retribution, recalling his past haughtiness, his casual indifference, and his profound cruelty towards those who had genuinely loved him. Yet others were moved to pity. After all, he was now experiencing the very torment he had inflicted upon so many others, the agonizing heartache of loving someone who could never reciprocate that affection, the desperate, unfulfilled yearning for something that remained perpetually just beyond reach. Echo was among the silent observers, though by this point she was scarcely more than a disembodied voice, a faint whisper carried on the wind. When Narcissus addressed his reflection, she occasionally caught his uttered words, sending them back to him from the ancient rocks and towering trees encircling the pool. "Beautiful," he might murmur in admiration. "And beautiful," the resonant mountain would softly echo back. "Why won't you come to me?" He would plead, his voice imbued with a desperate longing, and the lingering echo would faithfully repeat, "Come to me, come to me." Ultimately, Narcissus simply wasted away and faded into oblivion, much as Echo had before him. Some accounts suggest that his physical form dissolved into the very earth surrounding the pool, enriching the soil. Other narratives propose that he underwent a profound metamorphosis, becoming an entirely different entity, one capable of existing simultaneously in both terrestrial and ethereal realms, rooted firmly in the earth, but perpetually reaching towards the boundless sky. However, as days inexorably lengthened into weeks, it became tragically clear that no tangible reunion with his beloved reflection would ever materialize. Narcissus grew increasingly gaunt, his once golden hair now lank and dull, his flawless skin pale and translucent from the relentless deprivation of sunlight and sustenance. Still, he found himself utterly unable to tear away from the pool's captivating embrace, unable to cease his fervent gaze at the face that stared back at him with such perfect, profoundly heartbreaking understanding. Perhaps he perceived those returning echoes as his water nymph's earnest attempts to communicate with him from her elusive, watery domain. Perhaps they ignited within him a flicker of hope, hope that she was indeed listening, that she genuinely cared, and that someday she might discover a way to join him on solid ground. What enduring legacy emerged from that precise spot beside the tranquil water, where a young man had fallen so deeply in love with the very concept of love itself? From that serene pool, now the birthplace of a unique flower, one can discern something profoundly intriguing if one listens with careful attention. The intricate manner in which sound traversed the ancient world, conveying messages in ways that the Greeks comprehended with far greater sophistication than modern understanding might initially suggest. Imagine a traveler journeying through the majestic mountains of ancient Greece on a crisp, clear morning. Everywhere around them, disembodied voices seem to call back and forth. These are not precisely human voices, yet they possess an uncanny resemblance. The rhythmic cadence of footsteps upon the rocky path returns to the traveler from the towering cliff faces, amplified, doubled, and even tripled. When one intentionally calls out a greeting, seeking to test the acoustic phenomenon, their own words come racing back, sometimes with pristine clarity, at other times fragmented into disparate syllables that seem to coalesce into an entirely different, almost alien language. For the ancient Greeks, these occurrences were far more than mere interesting acoustic phenomena. They were interpreted as profound dialogues with the invisible inhabitants of the landscape, direct messages emanating from the spirits believed to reside within the venerable rocks, ancient trees, and majestic mountain peaks. Each echo carried with it a unique narrative, and indeed, every narrative possessed a distinct name. The very word echo itself derives from the name of the mountain nymph in our tale. Yet the Greeks possessed a rich lexicon of diverse terms to describe the various ways sound could propagate and return. There was antiphona, denoting the responsive voice that reverberated from temple walls during sacred religious ceremonies. Then there was ketchus, the resonant sound that appeared to descend from elevated places, as if it were the very voices of the gods themselves. Greek architects, remarkably, possessed an understanding of these intricate acoustic principles that far exceeded contemporary expectations. When they meticulously designed their grand theaters, expertly carved into the natural contours of hillsides in perfect semicircular forms, they were not merely constructing venues for performance. They were deliberately engineering spaces where even the softest whisper uttered from the stage could effortlessly reach the uppermost rows of seats. More profoundly, they were also creating environments where the surrounding landscape itself became an integral, dynamic component of the dramatic performance. Consider the experience of sitting within the magnificent theater at Epidaurus on a balmy evening, observing a profound tragedy unfold upon the stage below. The actor portraying Oedipus might cry out in an agony of despair, and his voice would ascend gracefully up the tiered stone seats, reach the distant mountains beyond, and then return to the audience transformed, softened, imbued with a newfound mystery by the vast distance and the ancient stone. For a fleeting moment, it would sound as if the very gods themselves were commenting upon the unfolding action, lending their own resonant voices to the profound human drama. The deep resonance of human voices within this ancient drama was by no means an accidental occurrence. The Hellenes held a profound conviction that echoes constituted one of the primary avenues through which transcendent entities communicated with the mortal realm. When an individual perceived their own utterances reverberating from a hallowed grove or a consecrated temple edifice, they interpreted this phenomenon as the deity's direct rejoinder to their invocations, a palpable acknowledgement of their earthly presence. Furthermore, those who tended flocks in the elevated mountain regions developed their own intricate rapport with these auditory reflections. They would direct calls to their livestock, utilizing specific vocalizations, long and sustained notes, which they understood would project effectively and be seized and amplified by the surrounding rock formations. Through prolonged observation and practice, these pastoralists gradually acquired the ability to interpret the topographical nuances of the landscape through sound, discerning which valleys possessed the capacity to absorb their voices entirely, and which precipitous cliffs would return them with enhanced intensity. Children raised within these rugged mountain communities were initiated early into the understanding that echoes possess distinct characteristics and temperaments. The reverberation emanating from the ancient olive grove, for instance, offered a sonic signature markedly different from that which returned from the marble quarry. Some echoes manifested as swift and incisive, reiterating words almost before the speaker had fully articulated them. Conversely, other echoes unfolded with a leisurely and ethereal quality, seemingly cradling individual syllables for several heartbeats before gently relinquishing them back into the ambient air. The specific echo originating from the sacred spring, a site reputedly inhabited by the nymph Echo herself, was renowned for its singularly distinctive nature. Travelers frequently recounted that this particular echo appeared to dwell lingeringly upon certain words, especially those pertaining to themes of romantic affection, profound yearning, or the poignant anguish of being misunderstood. On occasion, they observed that it would isolate a solitary word from a more extended utterance, repeating it multiple times as if to underscore its exceptional import or profound meaning. Artisans of sound and verse, musicians and poets alike, dedicated meticulous attention to these inherent acoustic attributes. A minstrel engaged in the composition of a novel melody would habitually test its resonance in a variety of locales, carefully observing how the returning echoes subtly reshaped the cadence and the semantic depth of his lyrical expressions. Certain stanzas, which might have seemed rather uninspired or prosaic when spoken within the confines of an ordinary chamber, would acquire a vibrant vitality when intoned from a mountainside. The reverberating echoes frequently generated unanticipated harmonies and intricate counterpoints, elements that the composer had never conceived in his original vision. The eminent poet Pindar, in his writings, even described the artistic endeavor of competing with these echoes, striving to fashion verses that would achieve an even greater aesthetic beauty when they returned, transmuted by the solid stone and the expanse of distance. He eloquently articulated the demanding challenge of crafting works intended for a dual audience. The living individuals assembled around him, and the unseen, ethereal spirits who would capture his words and return them in an altered form. Formal religious observances frequently incorporated these acoustic phenomena with deliberate intent. Priests would strategically position themselves at points where their intoned supplications would reverberate from the temple walls, thereby fostering the powerful impression of divine voices actively participating in the sacred worship. The devout congregants would hear their own sung responses returned to them, layered and multiplied, transforming a modest assembly into the resonant semblance of a vast choir. During the esoteric rites conducted at Eleusis, those clandestine spiritual ceremonies that promised initiates a profound glimpse into the mysteries of life after death, a significant component of the deeply transformative experience involved meticulously orchestrated acoustic effects. Participants would perceive voices seemingly emanating from subterranean depths, from the celestial expanse, and from all cardinal directions simultaneously. These artfully manipulated echoes collectively forged an otherworldly soundscape that convinced many attendees they were, in truth, engaging in direct communion with the gods. Nevertheless, the presence of echoes was not universally welcomed. Certain localities acquired reputations for possessing problematic acoustic characteristics. It was widely recounted that the echo at a particular crossroads, situated near Athens, had the uncanny ability to distort words into their precise antitheses, such that a spoken benediction would metamorphose into a malediction, and a cordial greeting would be transmuted into an ominous warning. Consequently, travelers learned to traverse such places in silence rather than hazard the peril of having their own utterances turned against them. The bustling marketplace in Athens presented its own unique set of echo-related difficulties, with hundreds of vendors simultaneously proclaiming their wares. The cacophony of sound would rebound from the surrounding edifices, returning as an incomprehensible and overwhelming roar. Customers, in response, adapted by conducting their transactions through gestures as much as through verbal negotiation, pointing at desired goods and raising fingers to convey prices rather than attempting to project their voices above the pervasive acoustic pandemonium. In striking contrast, the venerable library at Alexandria was meticulously designed with the explicit purpose of minimizing reverberations, thereby creating environments where scholars could engage in hushed conversations without their dialogues reflecting off the walls and inadvertently disturbing other readers. The master architects ingeniously employed tapestries and columns of specially contoured shapes to absorb sound energy rather than to reflect it, effectively establishing enclaves of profound quietude within the confines of an otherwise bustling metropolis. Greek philosophers, for their part, were deeply captivated by the metaphysical ramifications inherent in the phenomenon of echoes. If an utterance spoken into an empty valley subsequently returned to the speaker, had that individual genuinely engaged in a conversation with their own self? Did echoes, perhaps, constitute tangible proof that the past possessed the capacity to communicate with the present moment? Plato, in his philosophical discourse, conceptualized echoes as mere shadows of sound, imperfect replicas of an original truth. much akin to his celebrated allegory of prisoners observing spectral images projected upon a cave wall. Aristotle, adopting a more pragmatic methodology, dedicated his efforts to studying the precise physics governing the propagation and return of sound waves. Yet, even his rigorous scientific observations were undeniably imbued with the overarching understanding that echoes transcended mere acoustic phenomena. They were, rather, an integral component of the vibrant, ongoing dialogue between humanity and the natural world. As twilight descends gently over the majestic mountains, and one happens to be retracing their steps through those very valleys where the nymph Echo once engaged in cheerful discourse with her sisters, an intriguing observation might be made. The echoes appear subtly altered in the fading light, acquiring a softer, somehow more contemplative quality. One's own footsteps reverberate back, resembling a gentle, hushed conversation. And when an individual pauses to listen attentively, the ensuing silence feels remarkably replete with expectant voices. One might ponder what those voices might be waiting to convey if humanity truly possessed the discernment to listen properly. Indeed, those expectant voices belong to entities with whom the ancient Greeks were intimately acquainted. Not as distant, abstract mythological figures, but as integral neighbors, woven seamlessly into the very fabric of daily existence, as tangible and immediate as the trees they inhabited and the life-giving streams they diligently protected. One might envision waking in a modest Greek village, precisely as the sun's nascent rays begin to caress the hilltops. The day commences, as most days did in ancient Greece, with a pervasive awareness of the invisible community that shares one's world. Before fetching water from the communal well, an individual would pause to respectfully acknowledge the naiad who resided there. Prior to traversing the oak grove on the way to the fields, one would offer a deferential nod to the dryads who claimed those venerable trees as their abode. This practice was not precisely superstition, though it might appear so to contemporary minds. It was, rather, more akin to a form of courtesy, the same kind of politeness and consideration one would extend to human neighbors, but broadened to encompass the ethereal spirits who shared the natural landscape. The Hellenes profoundly understood that they were never truly alone within the vast natural world, holding the conviction that every significant feature of the environment possessed its own resident consciousness. Nymphs, in their myriad forms, were ubiquitous, as prevalent as wildflowers, and equally diverse in their manifestations. The Oreads made their homes in the rugged mountains, often seen gracefully dancing upon the high peaks in the early morning light. The Nereids inhabited the expansive sea, famously riding dolphins and frequently assisting mariners in navigating perilous waters. The Hamadryads were inextricably bound to specific trees. Their very existence was intertwined with that of their oak, ash, or olive tree, and upon the demise of their arboreal counterpart, they too would perish. The Potamides resided in the flowing rivers, while the Limnades made their abodes in tranquil lakes. Each distinct category of nymph possessed her own unique personality, her specific preferences, and her characteristic modes of interaction with the human inhabitants who shared her designated territory. The mountain nymphs, for instance, generally exhibited a wild and uninhibited disposition, more inclined to engage in innocuous mischief or playful pranks than to offer direct and explicit assistance. The aquatic nymphs, conversely, typically proved more helpful, yet simultaneously displayed a more volatile and unpredictable temperament. Should one inadvertently offend such a nymph, One might discover their well running inexplicably dry, or their fishing nets consistently yielding no catch. A typical Greek farmer possessed as profound an understanding of the nymphs inhabiting his land as he did of his human neighbors. He could readily identify which spring served as the dwelling place for a particularly generous naiad, one who would guarantee a consistent water flow, provided one regularly left her occasional offerings of fresh flowers or honey cakes. He knew which specific grove was safeguarded by dryads who preferred to be approached in the morning rather than in the evening, and which winding mountain path was overseen by an oread who derived pleasure from hearing travelers sing as they journeyed. Children in these communities were raised with narratives about local nymphs in much the same way that modern children might grow up hearing stories about the family residing across the street. Do not pluck flowers from the meadow situated behind the temple, a mother might admonish her daughter. That is where the Antausai reside, and they become considerably displeased when individuals disturb their cultivated plot. Or, should you become disoriented within the forest, locate a stream and trace its path. The Potamides will guide you homeward if you make a polite request. These were not abstract entities culled from distant myths. They were, rather, integral members of the community, possessing discernible relationships, distinct preferences, and temperaments that fluctuated with the changing seasons. The dryad who inhabited the venerable oak tree situated by the village gate might appear cheerful and welcoming during the vernal season, when her tree was burgeoning with new foliage, but could become melancholic in autumn when its leaves commenced their descent. Young individuals, in particular, cultivated personal and often practical relationships with these nymphs. A young girl in the process of learning the intricate skill of weaving might deposit small offerings at a shrine dedicated to the nymphs who safeguarded textile work, petitioning them to guide her fingers and assist her in creating exquisitely beautiful cloth. Similarly, a boy undergoing instruction in the art of hunting might actively seek the favor of the oreds, who possessed an intimate knowledge of every game trail traversing the mountains, and could ensure his safe return home with essential sustenance for his family. Indeed, the benevolent spirits often assisted individuals in securing sustenance for their kin. Matrimonial traditions frequently incorporated nymphs as pivotal figures. Aspiring brides, prior to their nuptial ceremonies, would undertake pilgrimages to the nearest hallowed spring, earnestly entreating the resident naiad to bestow her divine benediction upon their forthcoming union, wishing for abundant fertility and enduring felicity. These maidens would immerse themselves in the pristine waters, presenting votive offerings such as delicate jewelry or fragrant perfumes, and on occasion would dedicate the entire eve preceding their wedding to intimate communion with the ethereal spirit, openly articulating their deepest aspirations and anxieties concerning their impending domestic existence. Agriculturalists meticulously structured their labor schedules around a calendar replete with nymph-centric observances. Specific dates were reverently designated for paying homage to the arboreal nymphs, the dryads. During these sacred periods, all horticultural activities, including the essential tasks of pruning and harvesting, were strictly suspended, and instead, the verdant orchards would be adorned with colorful ribbons and blossoms. Conversely, other days were consecrated to the aquatic nymphs, the naiads, during which the entire community would undertake the communal cleansing and sanctification of all local wells and natural springs, often culminating in modest yet joyous celebrations conducted beside the flowing streams and winding rivers. The demarcation lines separating the ethereal domains of nymphs from human habitations were, by and large, comprehensively comprehended and scrupulously honored. A shared communal awareness dictated that particular sylvan groves were inherently hallowed, that specific natural springs were inviolable and not to be contaminated, and that certain lofty mountain summits served as the exclusive choreographic venues for the graceful orads. Transgressing these established boundaries was not merely an act of discourtesy. It presented a tangible peril. A nymph whose cherished abode suffered desecration or defilement possessed the formidable capacity to inflict considerable hardship upon the human transgressors, rendering their lives exceedingly arduous. However, the intricate relationship between humanity and the nymph realm transcended mere avoidance of transgression. Nymphs, when approached with due reverence and consideration, could transform into formidable confederates. They possessed intimate knowledge of the natural world, discerning the choicest locations for gathering wild honey, identifying plants imbued with potent healing properties, and pinpointing where crystalline streams flowed with the greatest clarity and depth. A skilled hunter, having cultivated the amity of the indigenous dryads, might discover that fortuitous deer paths materialized precisely when most needed, or that his projectiles, launched within their sacred sylvan territory, achieved an uncanny accuracy, ensuring a successful quarry. Pastoralists, whose flocks roamed through diverse landscapes, forged exceptionally intimate bonds with the myriad nymphs inhabiting those grazing grounds. Over time, these shepherds developed a profound aptitude for deciphering the subtle omens that betrayed a nymph's disposition. For instance, an unusually fervent chorus of birdsong might signify that the dryads were in a whimsical and frolicsome mood, whereas an unanticipated veil of mist ascending from a watercourse could denote that the water nymphs were in a pensive state, favoring solitude and preferring not to be disquieted. A select few shepherds attained renown for their extraordinary faculty in communicating with these ethereal beings. Their unique talents would be invoked when an individual required mediation for secure transit through especially hallowed territory, or when a settlement sought elucidation regarding an abrupt alteration in the flow of their communal spring. These sagacious men, and occasionally women, effectively functioned as unofficial envoys, bridging the divide between the mortal and nymphic societies. The rhythms of the year were often punctuated by seasonal festivals, which frequently revolved around elaborate nymphic commemorations. Vernal celebrations specifically paid homage to the reawakening of the tree nymphs, marking their emergence from their profound winter slumber, with whole communities converging within hallowed groves to engage in joyous song, spirited dance, and communal feasting. Estival festivities directed their focus towards the vivacious water nymphs, featuring exhilarating swimming contests and competitive boat races, meticulously orchestrated to demonstrate profound gratitude for the spirits who diligently maintained the ceaseless flow of rivers and the abundant replenishment of wells. Autumn heralded more contemplative and poignant observances, recognizing the inherent melancholy of the dryads as their arboreal charges prepared for the profound stillness of winter dormancy. During this period, communities would meticulously collect fallen leaves into symbolic ceremonial mounds, adorning them with the vibrant hues of late-blooming flowers and flickering candles, thereby fashioning exquisite tableaux that honored the nymphs' profound dedication and facilitated their trees' vital period of repose. Winter constituted the most subdued interval for nymph-centric engagements, yet it was by no means entirely devoid of activity. Individuals would discreetly deposit modest tokens of appreciation at the foot of slumbering trees, expressing gratitude to the dryads for their diligent guardianship throughout the growing season, and humbly soliciting their safe reappearance in the spring. Even the practice of ice fishing was invariably prefaced by painstaking diplomatic discussions with any naiads whose aquatic domains had succumbed to the frigid embrace of ice, thereby ensuring that the act of penetrating the frozen surface would not be construed as an act of hostility. Even profoundly significant political and strategic military judgments were formulated with careful consideration for established nymphic territories. When urban centers embarked upon the ambitious planning of novel thoroughfares or intricate aqueduct systems, they invariably sought counsel from indigenous priests who possessed specialized expertise in nymph relations, meticulously ensuring that the proposed construction endeavors would not inflict harm upon vital sacred groves or pristine springs. Furthermore, military strategists, when devising their campaigns, would occasionally orchestrate circuitous routes around recognized nymph habitats, operating under the shrewd conviction that cultivating the benevolence of indigenous spirits held greater strategic import than merely economizing a single day's march. As one prepares to embrace slumber within this venerable ancient epoch, attuned to the gentle soughing of the wind rustling through the foliage beyond the casement, one might discern faint sounds resembling delicate laughter or perhaps melodious, hushed singing. The dryads, too, are preparing for their nocturnal repose, engaging in soft confidences about the day's occurrences, exchanging whispered anecdotes concerning the mortal beings they have observed, and thoughtfully devising minor acts of benevolence for the morrow. One is prompted to ponder the profound divergence in our contemporary rapport with the natural environment, if we continue to hold faith in the existence of such unseen companions, if we still allocated moments to reverently acknowledge the intrinsic spirits inhabiting every locale. This profound inquiry concerning the inherent spirits of specific locales invariably guides our contemplation towards the most consecrated enclaves within the ancient Hellenic civilization. Those tranquil basins where the subterranean currents of the earth ascended into the luminous embrace of sunlight, where the ethereal veil separating distinct realms became remarkably attenuated, and where resonant voices emanating from beneath the terrestrial surface had perpetually communicated with those possessing the discerning faculty to truly apprehend their messages. One might envision oneself positioned beside a pristine spring, nestled within a venerable grove of ancient olive trees, situated amidst the undulating hills above the renowned sanctuary of Delphi. The crystalline, frigid water effervesces forth from profound subterranean depths, coalescing into a modest pool before gently overflowing to engender a meandering stream that gracefully descends towards the valley below. The auditory impression is one of subtle yet ceaseless persistence, not the tumultuous cascade of a waterfall, but rather the measured, enduring articulation of water that has articulated its presence within this sacred site for millennia. This specific aqueous source has been revered as sacred for a duration extending beyond living memory. Long before the magnificent temple dedicated to Apollo was erected in the valley below, individuals journeyed to this very spot to partake of its waters, to perform ritual ablutions, and to attune their senses. The liquid possesses a subtle mineral inflection, imparting a nuanced suggestion of the profound terrestrial strata through which it traversed to attain the surface. Indigenous inhabitants widely assert its inherent therapeutic virtues, claiming its efficacy in alleviating cephalalgia and assuaging troubled psyches. Beyond these physical benefits, it is believed to facilitate the reception of ethereal auditory phenomena, hushed intimations of profound wisdom, elusive fragments of prescient revelations, and faint reverberations of divine colloquies. Not every seeker is privileged to apprehend these elusive voices, and even those who are do not perceive them on every occasion. The spring articulates its pronouncements at its own discretion, selecting its chosen recipient, and its communications frequently possess a hermetic quality, necessitating meticulous exegesis. Aqueous sources of this mystical caliber permeated the entirety of the Hellenic world, each distinguished by its singular essence and esteemed renown. Some were celebrated for their restorative waters, while others garnered fame for their oracular pronouncements. The revered spring at Dodona, for instance, communicated its enigmatic messages through the gentle sibilance of the ancient oak leaves that gracefully overhung its surface, thereby generating a unique rustling idiom that the resident priests had assiduously mastered the art of interpreting. Conversely, the springs nestled in Lebedea demanded intricate and rigorous purification rites, preceding their bestowal of visionary insights upon those who partook of their liquid bounty. Preeminent among all was the illustrious Castalian spring at Delphi, from which the Pythia, Apollo's consecrated priestess, would imbibe prior to her solemn entry into the temple to articulate divine prophecies. The waters emanating from this particular spring were widely reputed to induce a state of sacred frenzy, a transient dissolution of conventional awareness that facilitated a mortal voice becoming a conduit for celestial communication. Nevertheless, one did not require the esteemed status of a celebrated priestess to partake in the distinctive enchantment inherent to hallowed springs. Common individuals sought out these sacred sites for their everyday tribulations. A diligent farmer troubled by the prospects of his harvest, a solicitous mother anxious over the ailing health of her offspring, or a young soul grappling with the momentous choice between divergent life trajectories. They would patiently recline beside the flowing waters, occasionally for extended periods, anticipating the profound lucidity that frequently appeared to materialize from the soothing cadence of the moving current. The customary rite was typically unembellished. One would present a modest votive offering, freshly gathered flowers, a measure of golden honey, or a few precious drops of wine ceremonially poured onto the earth. The petitioner would articulate their query audibly, or at times, simply retain it silently within their contemplation. Subsequently, a period of patient anticipation would ensue, engaging not merely the auditory senses, but rather every faculty capable of discerning delicate, ethereal communications. On occasion, the desired elucidation manifested as an audible utterance, words that seemed to emanate directly from the aqueous depths or to murmur from the verdant foliage encircling the site. More frequently, however, the response arrived as a progressive metamorphosis in comprehension, a deliberate unraveling and clarification of previously convoluted cogitations. The spring did not furnish explicit directives or precise instructions, but rather served as a catalyst, assisting the supplicant in perceiving their innate sagacity with enhanced perspicuity. Wayfarers frequently meticulously charted their itineraries to incorporate sojourns at consecrated springs. A merchant embarking on a lengthy journey towards a remote metropolis might elect to halt at a wayside spring, earnestly soliciting divine safeguarding for his arduous peregrinations. A devout pilgrim, progressing towards a principal temple, would purposefully pause at lesser shrines along the route, thereby cultivating a profound and incremental rapport with the hallowed topography, layer upon intricate layer. Adolescents confronting momentous life choices undertook specific pilgrimages to springs renowned for their sagacious counsel. A young maiden deliberating between potential suitors might spend an entire night reposing beside a spring dedicated to Aphrodite, ardently anticipating chthonic dreams that would elucidate which matrimonial selection would usher in true felicity. Similarly, a young man contemplating whether to emulate his father's agricultural vocation or to pursue his destiny within the bustling urban environment might seek the wisdom of a spring consecrated to Hermes, the venerable deity of voyaging and novel enterprises. Furthermore, these sacred aqueous sources functioned as potent sites of restoration, ministering to both corporeal and psychological afflictions. Individuals would immerse themselves in the hallowed currents, imbibe their life-giving properties, and even transport modest quantities back to their domiciles within specially crafted receptacles. The therapeutic effect was not invariably instantaneous or spectacular. Rather, it typically manifested as a progressive re-establishment of equilibrium, a deliberate and gentle journey back to robust health and comprehensive integrity. The journey back to a state of robust health and profound inner harmony was often sought at sacred springs. Each of these flowing sources nurtured its own distinct assembly of habitual visitors. A venerable matriarch who arrived with the dawn to replenish her earthen amphora and unburden her soul to the resident naiad. A diligent shepherd who paused each twilight on his homeward journey, conveying tidings from the rugged mountain terrain and soliciting counsel concerning his pastoral charges. And a cohort of youthful mothers who convened weekly to immerse their infants in the hallowed waters, sharing the joys and tribulations of child-rearing. These spontaneous gatherings organically fostered their unique customs and interpretations. They possessed an intuitive knowledge of the optimal moments for the spring's pronouncements, discerning which offerings were most favorably received and which inquiries elicited the most lucid responses. This localized wisdom, a precious inheritance, was carefully transmitted across successive generations, thereby weaving a vibrant tapestry of oral tradition around each revered hydrological site. The ever-shifting tapestry of the seasons exerted a profound influence upon the individual temperaments of these springs, mirroring the broader impact on the entire natural world. Water that might have effervesced with cheerful buoyancy during the warmth of summer could become pensive and deliberate in its flow throughout the winter months. Certain springs were even reputed to possess heightened prophetic capabilities during specific lunar phases or on particular dates within the established religious calendar. During epochs of profound tribulation, be it widespread armed conflicts, devastating pestilences, or catastrophic natural disasters, these hallowed springs transformed into pivotal centers for communal supplication and deliberation. Individuals would converge in numbers far exceeding the norm, seeking not merely personal counsel, but a collective sagacity crucial for navigating through such arduous times. The pronouncements emanating from these aqueous oracles frequently underscored the virtues of fortitude, perseverance, and the paramount importance of preserving human connections, even when the surrounding world seemed plunged into utter disarray. Furthermore, the springs functioned as invaluable, informal repositories of community remembrance. The naiads believed to inhabit these waters were thought to possess an omnipresent awareness, recalling every whispered exchange, every fervent plea, and every pivotal occurrence that transpired in their vicinity. Consulting a spring, therefore, was not merely an act of soliciting novel insights. It was an immersion into the cumulative sagacity of all the people who had sought assistance there before. Some springs, over time, cultivated reputations for specialized forms of communication. The source adjacent to a renowned ceramic studio, for instance, was said to murmur counsel on artisanal methods. The fount, nestled by a thriving viticulture estate, offered invaluable expertise on oenology. The nexus at a confluence of three mercantile arteries became famed for its insights into far-flung locales and exotic traditions. As the centuries progressed, and the Hellenic world successively transitioned under the dominion of Rome, followed by the pervasive currents of Christianity, many of these sacred springs maintained their profound significance, albeit with evolving interpretive frameworks. Christian recluses, understanding the inherent sanctity of these locales, would erect modest sanctuaries beside them, recognizing that these places had always represented perpetual liminal zones between worlds, irrespective of the divine appellations attributed to their resident presences. Even in the contemporary era, for those who know where to look, a number of these ancient springs continue their ceaseless flow, still drawing individuals yearning for elucidation and tranquility. While the ceremonial practices might have undergone transformation, and the names of the gods might have shifted, the immutable human impulse to commune with flowing currents in pursuit of sagacity remains constant across the ages. As one might sit beside this particular spring within the tranquil olive grove, listening to its gentle murmur intermingling with the sibilant breath of the breeze through ancient leaves, one might discover one's own thoughts becoming clearer, one's own inner voice more readily discernible. The water continues its patient conversation with the encompassing earth and the boundless sky, carrying messages between worlds, just as it always has. In the deepening dusk, as the first celestial bodies begin to appear, reflected in the still pools nestled between the springs, what profound questions would one entrust to these ancient, listening waters? There exists a bloom often observed in early spring gardens, distinguished by its pristine white petals gracefully curved around a radiant golden heart, swaying gently in the passing zephyr. The ancient Greeks bestowed upon it the appellation Narcissus, believing it to enshrine the memory of a young man whose daily existence was defined by an activity we might now deem quite ordinary: perambulation. One can readily envision him traversing the undulating topography outside an ancient Greek polis, perhaps in the vicinity of Thespiae and Boeotia, where hazy veils of dawn cling to venerable olive groves and the serpentine trails meander languidly between low-lying stone enclosures. His name was Narcissus, and each day he roused himself before the first light, donned his simple sandals, and commenced traversing the familiar routes woven through the countryside. The act of walking itself was by no means an anomaly. Young Greek men frequently dedicated their mornings to this pursuit, moving through the landscape at a measured pace that permitted them to keenly observe their surroundings. The way morning shadows stretched across terraced hillsides, how the light transformed as it filtered through various species of foliage, the subtle avian melodies unheard by human ears. What rendered Narcissus distinct, however, was the singular impact he had upon those who encountered him. As one hypothetically accompanies him on one of these strolls, it becomes evident that other villagers, young women bearing water jars, pastoral guardians leading their flocks, venerable elders seated in doorways, all momentarily pause as he passes. This cessation of activity was not prompted by any dramatic or attention-seeking gesture on his part, but rather by something more subtle and profoundly puzzling. It manifested in the way sunlight gilded his locks, perhaps, or in the innate grace and effortless fluidity of his movements. The Greeks possessed a precise term for this quality. They called it beauty, yet their understanding of it differed significantly from our contemporary perception. To them, beauty was an intrinsic force that compelled one to halt and ponder more profound philosophical inquiries, contemplating inherent symmetry and questioning why certain elements in the cosmos appeared to coalesce perfectly, while others felt awkward or discordant. One particular morning, as Narcissus meandered along a path that closely followed a nascent waterway, a young woman named Echo discerned his presence from a distance. She had been foraging for botanical treasures in the cool embrace of the early morning, filling her basket with aromatic mint and pungent oregano growing wild along the water's edge. The conventional social decorum would have dictated a verbal greeting, perhaps an inquiry about the path ahead, or a comment on the pleasant weather. Yet, Echo found herself experiencing an unbidden reluctance. There was something about the mesmerizing progression of Narcissus through the landscape that instilled in her a desire simply to watch and listen, much like one might pause to observe an undisturbed creature of the wild before it registers human presence. She followed at a discreet distance, not with intent to intrude, but driven by an unadulterated curiosity about where someone walks when they appear so completely absorbed in the very act of perambulation itself. This discreet pursuit gradually evolved into a recurrent ritual. Day after day, Echo found herself drawn to observe Narcissus from a respectful remove. She began to notice specific patterns: his consistent gravitation towards aqueous routes, his momentary halts to contemplate his likeness in limpid shallows or pools, an act performed not out of conceit, but with the same placid scrutiny he applied to every other detail of his surroundings. His reflection gazing might strike an observer as slightly peculiar, yet not dramatically so. After all, in an epoch preceding the widespread availability of mirrors, clear water offered one of the few opportunities for lucid self-scrutiny. And there is an innate human inclination towards curiosity about one's own appearance, particularly when it elicits enigmatic responses from others. One can readily envision Narcissus kneeling by the stream, pondering the visage gazing back, perhaps speculating on the same things anyone might wonder. Do I bear a resemblance to my father? What do other people perceive when they look at me? Why do conversations sometimes inexplicably cease upon my arrival? The duration of his aquatic sojourn incrementally elongated each day. What commenced as a fleeting survey transformed into several minutes of prolonged, silent introspection. Narcissus began to carry modest provisions of bread or orchard fruits with him, consuming his simple breakfast while seated beside tranquil basins or streams, invariably choosing locations where the water was sufficiently quiescent to offer an unblemished reflection. There was an undeniable serenity about these morning meals by the water. The illumination was mellow, the atmospheric coolness invigorating, and the world seemed to exist in a palpable state of temporal suspension. One could readily picture the gentle sounds, the hushed murmur of currents moving quietly over smoothed pebbles, the subtle soughing of foliage in the gentle zephyr, the far-off cries of agrarian laborers heading to their fields. But gradually, a subtle yet profound metamorphosis began to unfold within these quiet moments. The glances at his reflection became not only longer but singularly absorbed. Narcissus commenced a nascent engagement with the aqueous simulacrum, inclining his head to observe its responsive motion, extending a hand to disrupt the surface and witness its ephemeral dissolution and subsequent reconstitution. It is not difficult to comprehend how such a progression might occur. When one dedicates extended periods to observing one's own likeness in quiescent waters, especially under the diffused pre-dawn luminescence, the image can assume a startling vivacity and reciprocity, a responsive mirroring of every cranial tilt, an instantaneous replication of a nascent smile, a reciprocal gesture to every outstretched limb. Days continued to unfold, and Narcissus dedicated increasingly protracted sojourns by the water's edge. His perambulations became markedly diminished, invariably culminating at the singular pellucid basin where the reflection appeared most vivid and lifelike. He began to bring augmented provisions of sustenance, then remained through the entire morning, eventually extending his stay into the afternoon hours. From her vantage point amidst the arboreal canopy, Echo observed this gradual transformation with mounting apprehension. She watched as Narcissus commenced a discourse with his own mirrored image, carrying on conversations characterized mostly by protracted silences and softly uttered expressions. She witnessed him decorating the pool's periphery with floral tributes, as if preparing gifts for an aquatic inhabitant. His daily existence became more and more singularly devoted to these interactions with the reflection. Narcissus roused himself early, but instead of setting off on his customary extensive rambles, he embarked on an immediate pilgrimage to the pool. He brought breakfast, but often neglected to eat it, too engrossed in the captivating dialogue with the image in the water. One can perceive how an individual, particularly one who spends the majority of their time in solitude, thinking and observing, might gradually lose track of the demarcation between simulacrum and actuality. The image responds so immediately to every gesture, seems so present and attentive, that it begins to foster a profound sense of authentic camaraderie. Echo watched this tragic unfolding with the poignant sadness of someone who possesses an unspoken comprehension of an irreversible plight. She witnessed Narcissus growing thinner, spending entire days by the pool, speaking earnestly to the water about thoughts and feelings he had never previously confided to a living soul. The conclusion of this particular narrative unfolds with a subtle and gradual progression, rather than a sudden, dramatic climax. One particular morning, Echo, who habitually frequented her accustomed observation point, discovered that Narcissus had remained stationary beside the tranquil pool since the preceding day. He lay prone by the water's edge, his gaze still fixed intently upon his own mirrored image, yet his respiration was noticeably shallow, and his movements were sluggish and attenuated. As evening descended, his form had attained an immobility comparable to the unruffled surface of the water itself. It was precisely in the location where he had spent countless mornings that Echo discerned a novel presence. A diminutive white blossom, distinguished by a luminous golden core, had emerged and was flourishing at the very brink of the pool, precisely where the earth retained its moisture without becoming entirely saturated. The ancient Hellenes held a profound conviction that certain narratives did not merely conclude, but rather underwent a profound metamorphosis into something distinct, yet intrinsically linked to their original essence. The exquisite flower that materialized at that site subsequently bloomed each vernal season, consistently manifesting in close proximity to water, invariably inclining its delicate form ever so slightly towards its own watery reflection. They bestowed upon this botanical marvel the appellation Narcissus, and meticulously cultivated it within their cultivated grounds as a poignant mnemonic device, prompting contemplation of profound inquiries that defied facile resolution. What precisely constitutes genuine self-knowledge? How does one judiciously balance an acute awareness of oneself with an empathetic cognizance of others? And what underlying reasons explain why some of the most pivotal life lessons emanate from the careful observation of the unassuming, quotidian choices individuals make when they harbor the belief that their actions are unobserved? Shifting our focus to the notion of remote observation, let us metaphorically settle into the venerable stone seating of an ancient Greek theatrical venue and ponder the resonant vocalization that traverses these curvilinear amphitheatrical structures, reverberating off polished marble surfaces and returning to us in a transmuted, yet distinctly identifiable form. One might envision oneself situated within the hallowed confines of the theater of Dionysus in Athens on a balmy afternoon in the latter part of spring, perhaps around the year 450 BCE. The solar orb occupies a sufficiently elevated position to project sharply defined shadows from the tiered stone seating, and the aromatic essence of wild herbs, such as thyme and rosemary, which proliferate within the fissures of the marble blocks, is discernibly present, releasing their fragrant oils as the day's warmth intensifies. The theater, currently unoccupied between scheduled performances, permits one to perceive the unique acoustic characteristics of this space, utter any word, any phrase, and attend to the manner in which the sound propagates downwards towards the circular orchestral area, rebounds off the substantial stone backdrop, and subsequently returns to the speaker a mere instant later, its volume somewhat diminished, yet its clarity undeniably preserved. This captivating acoustic phenomenon profoundly intrigued the Greeks, and they intricately integrated it into their conceptual framework for understanding the mechanics of storytelling, the functioning of memory, and the compelling reason why certain vocalizations appear to persist in specific locales long after the original speaker has fallen silent. They designated this returning vocalization as echo, and they conceptualized her as a being who had once possessed the uninhibited capacity for speech, but was subsequently confined to merely reiterating the utterances of others. The genesis of Echo's own narrative is not situated within a theatrical setting, but rather amidst the verdant hills and dense forests, where auditory phenomena exhibit even more enigmatic behaviors. Should one have ever projected their voice into a mountain valley or shouted across the expanse of a lake, one would be intimately familiar with the manner in which one's vocalizations can return from a multiplicity of directions, occasionally overlapping with themselves, thereby engendering fleeting instances where one appears to be engaging in a colloquy with the very landscape. Echo, in her primordial form, was a mountain nymph, one of those ethereal mythological entities whom the Greeks envisioned as inhabiting untamed regions, entrusted with the guardianship of the minor enigmas inherent in the natural world. The persistent flow of certain springs, the perfect symmetrical growth of particular arboreal groves, the unexpected distant carrying of sounds by the capricious wind. However, Echo possessed a singular aptitude that distinguished her markedly from her fellow nymphs. She exhibited an extraordinary proficiency in the art of conversation, not merely in the act of speaking, but in that particular engaging and delightful form of discourse that causes the passage of time to go entirely unnoticed. She possessed the remarkable ability to narrate tales that organically built upon one another, meticulously weaving in intricate details and insightful observations that rendered even familiar narratives feel remarkably fresh and perpetually surprising. This exceptional aptitude for engaging discourse captured the discerning attention of Hera, the venerable consort of Zeus, though not in a manner that elicited the goddess's satisfaction. It was widely known that Zeus frequently absented himself from the lofty heights of Mount Olympus for undisclosed adventures. And whenever Hera embarked upon a search for his whereabouts, she invariably encountered Echo, who was invariably prepared with elaborate, captivating narratives about an extensive range of subjects, anything and everything, save for Zeus's actual location. One might vividly imagine these recurrent exchanges. Hera's arrival at a secluded mountain grove, her demeanor clearly indicative of a search, and Echo's graceful emergence from among the trees, offering a buoyant salutation and immediately launching into fascinating observations regarding the indigenous fauna, or meticulously detailed descriptions of fluctuating meteorological patterns, or even profound philosophical inquiries concerning the fundamental nature of temporal existence and mnemonic processes. The conversations were, undeniably, genuinely captivating. Echo possessed an inherent talent for unearthing intriguing perspectives on mundane subjects, yet their cumulative effect was to sufficiently impede Hera's investigative efforts, thereby affording Zeus ample time to conclude whatever clandestine adventure had drawn him to the terrestrial realm and to subsequently return to Olympus via an alternative route. Following the repetition of this precise pattern on multiple occasions, Hera became acutely aware of the ongoing deception. Rather than simply inflicting a dramatic and arbitrary punishment upon Echo, the sagacious goddess elected to impose a consequence that meticulously corresponded to the transgression. Inasmuch as Echo had skillfully employed her remarkable gift for conversation to obstruct authentic communication, she would consequently forfeit the intrinsic capacity to initiate speech altogether. From that day forth, Echo was condemned to merely reiterate the verbalizations uttered by others, and moreover, only the concluding few words of their discourse. Her vocal quality remained exquisitely beautiful and remarkably clear, yet she was irrevocably deprived of the ability to commence conversations, recount personal narratives, or articulate her own autonomous thoughts directly. This profound transformation fundamentally altered Echo's mode of engagement with the world. Instead of occupying a central position within social gatherings, effortlessly drawing individuals into animated discourse, she evolved into a being who listened with meticulous attention and discovered profound meaning within the fragmented remnants of speech that returned to her. When the distinguished Greek poets and revered playwrights recounted this particular narrative, they were simultaneously delving into a fundamental truth concerning the operational mechanics of language within a performance context. Within their meticulously designed theaters, actors donned masks specifically engineered to amplify their voices, and the architectural configurations were deliberately conceived to convey speech with exceptional clarity to even the most distant seats. However, the auditory output also reverberated and returned, thereby generating intricate layers of semantic meaning. A tragedian, delivering a poignant monologue concerning profound loss, might perceive his own words resonating back from the rigid stone seating, and both the performer and the attentive audience would collectively experience that auditory return as a form of interpretive commentary, the theater itself seemingly responding to and reflecting upon the intense emotions being articulated. The erudite poets profoundly understood that an echo, by its very nature, is never an exact replication. When an acoustic vibration rebounds back to an individual, it undergoes a transformation by virtue of its journey. It becomes softer, slightly delayed in its return, and occasionally fragmented. These subtle alterations possess the power to render familiar words sound remarkably novel, or to imbue them with additional strata of meaning that were not readily discernible when the words were initially spoken. Within the rich tapestry of Greek poetry, Echo evolved into a symbolic figure who personified this transformative potency of repetition. When the esteemed Sappho composed verses extolling the intricacies of love, she occasionally employed echo as a compelling metaphor for the manner in which profound emotions reverberate through the corridors of memory. How a lover's tender utterances return to one's consciousness at unexpected junctures, transmuted by the inexorable passage of time and the intensity of emotion, yet nevertheless retaining their fundamental recognizability. The pastoral poets, who meticulously crafted verses depicting the lives of shepherds and the rustic charm of rural existence, frequently incorporated Echo as a character who engaged in interactions with solitary herdsmen within secluded mountain valleys. In these evocative poems, the dialogue between a shepherd and Echo became a nuanced vehicle for exploring the themes of solitude and companionship, illustrating how the act of speaking to oneself or to the expansive landscape can, at times, furnish a particular kind of solace and clarity that direct conversation with other human beings might not always afford. One can readily envision these poetic shepherds dedicating protracted days in solitary communion with their flocks, articulating queries or observations into the vastness and attentively heeding the manner in which their spoken words returned. The heartfelt query, "Is anyone there?" would be distilled into the concise "anyone there." The speculative remark, "I think it might rain," would be reduced to the simple "might rain." The introspective ponderance, "I wonder if she remembers me," would be compressed into the poignant "remembers me." The echo, in these instances, frequently appeared to isolate the most salient component of the original utterance, systematically stripping away the inherent hesitations and qualifying clauses to lay bare the essential concern or the deeply held hope. In this profound manner, engaging in conversation with echo essentially transforms into a subtle form of self-discovery, an efficacious means of apprehending one's own innermost thoughts with enhanced lucidity. Greek theatrical directors possessed a sophisticated comprehension of this psychological dimension of echo and seamlessly integrated it into their meticulous staging practices. Crucial speeches were, on occasion, delivered from specific positions where the innate acoustic properties of the venue would generate the most pronounced echo effect, thereby ensuring that pivotal words would literally return to underscore the overarching themes. When the venerable Sophocles wished to accentuate a character's profound isolation, he might strategically position the actor such that their spoken words would echo prominently, thereby fostering the potent impression that they were truly alone, save for the internalized dialogue with their own reflected voice. When Euripides sought to convey that a character was relentlessly tormented by past decisions, he could judiciously employ echo to cause certain words to return with an insistent and haunting persistence. However, echo, in the rich tapestry of Greek poetry, was not invariably depicted as a figure of melancholy or profound loneliness. In the realm of comedies, the interaction with Echo could assume a delightfully playful and intellectually clever character. A theatrical persona might meticulously learn to phrase their verbalizations in such a manner that Echo's inevitable repetition would ingeniously create witty puns or nuanced double meanings, thereby transforming the inherent limitation into a sophisticated form of intellectual humor. The lyric poets discovered in Echo a profound means to articulate the very operational principles of poetry itself, illustrating how the most exceptional poems consistently return to their readers imbued with fresh meanings upon each successive reading. How familiar lexicon can astonish us anew when meticulously arranged in innovative patterns or articulated within novel contexts. As one remains seated within this silent, empty theater, attentively listening to the manner in which one's own voice returns from the venerable ancient stones, one might be prompted to contemplate what it would genuinely entail to experience the world primarily through this distinctive modality of reflected communication. What profound insights into the nature of language would one acquire if one's only means of expression were through reiteration and responsive engagement? Perhaps one would cultivate a heightened attentiveness to the precise lexical choices individuals make, becoming more acutely aware of the inherent rhythm and musicality embedded within ordinary speech. Conceivably, one might develop a more profound appreciation for the sanctity of silence, for the interstitial spaces between words where meanings possess the fluidity to shift and to multiply exponentially. The Greeks held a steadfast belief that echo continued to inhabit those locales where vocalizations readily carry and subsequently return. Within the hallowed confines of theaters and the majestic expanse of mountain valleys, across the shimmering surfaces of lakes and deep within the labyrinthine embrace of ancient forests. They conceived of her not as a figure of unmitigated tragedy, but rather as a being who had assimilated an alternative mode of participation in the ongoing dialogue between humanity and the encompassing world. And perhaps it is for this very reason that Greek poetry continues to resonate within our contemporary writing and our ongoing intellectual pursuits. It is why these ancient voices persist in returning to us across the chasm of centuries, transformed by their protracted journey through time, yet still unmistakably recognizable, still offering an abundance of novel meanings each time we listen with sufficient care and attentiveness to truly apprehend them. One might envision a journey along a dusty track that meanders through verdant olive groves within the region of Attica, possibly a mere 60-minute stroll from the bustling city of Athens. The early hours of dawn witness the ethereal mist gradually dissipating from the deep valleys, revealing a landscape steeped in antiquity. The venerable olive trees, with their gnarled, contorted trunks, bearing the indelible marks of countless seasons and elemental forces, display their silver-green foliage, which glistens and dances in the soft morning zephyr. Transitioning from the resonant pronouncements heard within ancient amphitheaters, an exploration into the Greek rural landscape commences, prompting contemplation on why its inhabitants, millennia ago, held the conviction that the very earth possessed a voice, and crucially, that its messages merited profound attention. Continuing this contemplative journey, observers would discern an inherent rhythm permeating the natural environment. The deliberate arrangement of trees, for instance, mirrors the organic undulations of the hillside, suggesting an intrinsic alignment with topographical features. Similarly, The robust stone barriers delineating distinct groves are meticulously constructed from indigenous rocks, unmistakably sourced from the very earth they segment. Even the well-trodden pathway beneath one's feet gracefully conforms to the most accessible contours of the terrain, its surface polished by the passage of countless generations who intuitively grasped the art of coexisting harmoniously with the land, rather than imposing their will upon it. These ancient inhabitants perceptively noted that specific locales appeared to engender distinct emotional or intellectual states. A secluded stand of ancient oak trees, for example, might consistently imbue visitors with a profound sense of introspection and gravitas, whereas a sun-drenched meadow situated beside a bubbling spring could reliably elevate one's mood, fostering a more sanguine outlook on life's challenges. For the ancient Greeks traversing these identical routes, this evident synergy between human endeavors and the immutable patterns of the natural world conveyed a profound significance. They perceived the landscape not merely as a passive stage or a utilitarian commodity, but rather as an engaged, dynamic participant in the unfolding tapestry of life. These phenomena were not dismissed as mere happenstance. Instead, the Hellenes profoundly believed they constituted irrefutable proof that diverse locations possessed unique temperaments and distinct methodologies for interacting with the human beings who frequented them. Consider, for instance, a hillside adorned with a profusion of wild aromatic herbs. It might articulate its messages through the potent fragrances liberated when the sun's warmth permeated the foliage, thereby transmitting vital intelligence concerning meteorological conditions, the progression of the seasons, and the intrinsic vitality of the very earth. Consequently, the Hellenes cultivated intricate customs centered on deciphering these communications from the natural environment. Prior to undertaking momentous choices concerning agricultural cultivation, the excavation of water sources, or the construction of dwellings, they would dedicate considerable periods to immersing themselves in prospective sites, diligently attending to nuanced indicators and recurring motifs. For the diligent Greek farmers and vigilant shepherds, these interwoven botanical assemblages resembled ongoing dialogues, wherein each botanical species reciprocated and complemented the provisions of its neighbors. For instance, the resilient rosemary contributed to safeguarding adjacent flora from specific insect infestations, while the deeply anchored roots of the fennel facilitated the ascent of subterranean moisture, rendering it accessible to more diminutive plants. In essence, the landscape itself imparted profound lessons concerning symbiotic collaboration and reciprocal sustenance. Should one possess the acumen to keenly observe and accurately decipher these visual cues, a similar profound experience could be gleaned. As the journey progresses, one might perceive the subtle alteration in the aroma emanating from the olive leaves as the morning sun intensifies its radiant embrace. Further meticulous scrutiny would reveal the specific symbiotic groupings of flora that thrived in close proximity. Wild rosemary frequently clustered near the ancient stone boundaries. Fennel flourished in the damp depressions, where rainwater naturally accumulated, and delicate miniature orchids nestled gracefully within the shaded recesses beneath more substantial trees. The ancient observers assiduously monitored the movement of water across and within the terrain during various seasonal cycles. They keenly identified locales that naturally drew avian species and advantageous insects, contrasting them with areas that appeared to deter detrimental pests. Furthermore, they noted the diurnal variations in light intensity across diverse spots and the nuanced shifts in wind currents dictated by the topography. This rigorous and attentive observation fostered in them a conviction that the land was actively conveying pertinent data capable of informing human choices. For instance, a hillside retaining its verdant hue deeper into the arid period signaled the presence of subterranean water veins. Conversely, a region where indigenous medicinal flora thrived with exceptional vigor intimated its suitability as a site for therapeutic endeavors. The rich tapestry of Greek mythology served to formalize these intricate environmental observations, transforming them into narratives concerning nymphs and various nature spirits believed to reside in specific locales and capable of conversing with mortals who approached them with due reverence. Yet, these accounts were far from mere whimsical fables. Rather, they represented highly sophisticated methodologies for embedding practical wisdom regarding harmonious and sustainable habitation within distinct ecological systems. When an individual sought counsel from a sacred grove concerning optimal periods for sowing or gathering crops, the presiding priests possessed the sagacity to impart guidance rooted in subtle metamorphoses in the arboreal inhabitants' conduct, such as the precise moment of leaf unfurling, the periodicity of acorn yields, and the particular manner in which branches swayed in varying atmospheric currents, all of which reflected broader climatological trends. Illustratively, the venerable oak groves consecrated to Zeus were habitually situated in regions where the trees attained exceptional size and longevity, frequently in close proximity to dependable subterranean water reservoirs. The sacerdotal figures tasked with deciphering the communications emanating from these hallowed groves were invariably individuals who had devoted extensive years to scrutinizing the trees' reactions to prevailing weather conditions, cyclical seasonal shifts, and a myriad of other ecological determinants. Analogously, the sacred springs, to which supplicants journeyed in pursuit of prophetic revelations, were selected for their inherent characteristics, where the water's discharge, limpidity, thermal properties, or mineral composition exhibited variations demonstrably correlated with meteorological events, annual cycles, or other natural occurrences. The priestesses entrusted with interpreting these aqueous messages were profoundly adept observers, possessing an intuitive grasp of how to decode complex environmental indicators. The Hellenes were convinced that such prolonged and assiduous observation had the potential to unlock profound insights unattainable through conventional pedagogical methods. They posited that the unwavering cadence of natural phenomena, the incremental transitions of illumination and obscuration, the nuanced alterations in atmospheric currents, and the responsive behaviors of flora and fauna to these shifts could function as a form of meditative practice. This contemplative engagement, they believed, served to sharpen cognitive faculties and facilitate the resolution of inner turmoil. Crucially, the Greek conviction in communicative landscapes transcended mere utilitarian applications. They furthermore held that the earth could impart more esoteric forms of sagacity, offering revelations concerning optimal modes of living, strategies for harmonious conflict resolution, and a deeper comprehension of one's intrinsic position within the grander schemata of existence. One might envision dedicating an entire afternoon to tranquil contemplation, seated silently in a singular location, perhaps upon an elevated hillside commanding panoramic views of a sprawling valley. In this serene posture, the observer would meticulously track the evolving tableau as the ambient light undergoes subtle metamorphoses and the day gradually advances, one would undoubtedly perceive how the interplay of shadows selectively unveils distinct topographical features at varying junctures, and how the vibrant palette of the landscape undergoes a kaleidoscopic transformation as the sun traverses its celestial arc. This deeply ingrained belief system actively fostered a mode of existence characterized by profound attentiveness to the intricate subtleties of the environment. Individuals cultivated an acute awareness, learning to discern when the conduct of avian species or insect populations signaled impending meteorological shifts. They developed a heightened sensitivity to the manifold ways in which their personal, physical, and emotional equilibrium was influenced by atmospheric conditions, such as barometric pressure, ambient humidity, and the diurnal and seasonal fluctuations in light. Moreover, narratives circulated concerning individuals who gleaned pivotal insights during prolonged periods spent within natural surroundings, not through ostentatious supernatural intercessions, but rather through the gradual accretion of understanding derived from harmonizing their personal tempo with the more deliberate, consistent cadences of the natural realm. A person grappling with a formidable dilemma might, for instance, dedicate several days to traversing an identical route through a specific landscape, meticulously noting how their cognitive processes and emotional states evolved in response to diverse locations and varying times of day. The council ultimately emerged from this methodical process of observation and introspection. Yet it was unequivocally interpreted as a direct communication emanating from the landscape itself. As twilight descends and one embarks upon the return journey along the winding path through the olive groves, a curious phenomenon might occur. The emergence of details previously overlooked during the morning's expedition. One could discern how the diminishing light filtering through the dense foliage casts entirely novel patterns upon the earth, how the cool evening air now bears a distinct array of fragrances, and how the vocalizations of the birds have perceptibly altered, signaling their preparations for the impending night. The very fabric of Greek architecture and urban design demonstrably mirrored this profound comprehension of landscape communication. Edifices were meticulously aligned to harness propitious wind currents and optimize exposure to natural light trajectories. Civic plazas and communal gathering areas were strategically situated in locations where inherent acoustic properties and panoramic visual vistas naturally augmented the diverse activities conducted therein. Furthermore, gardens were conceived not solely for their utilitarian value, but also as sanctified spaces where individuals could perpetuate their ongoing dialogues with the natural realm. The deliberate configuration of flora, meandering pathways, and integrated aquatic elements was purposefully engineered to cultivate opportunities for the precise brand of serene observation that the Hellenes believed was a conduit to profound wisdom and enlightened discernment. The ancient Greeks would have perceived these discernible variations not merely as agreeable diversions, but rather as the landscape perpetually engaging in its continuous discourse, with any individual prepared to lend a patient ear and exercise meticulous observation. And perhaps there resides a valuable lesson to be gleaned from this venerable practice. The proposition of regarding the surrounding world as a contemplative conversationalist, rather than merely a picturesque setting for human preoccupations. What profound insights might be unveiled if one were to approach their own quotidian strolls and outdoor excursions as precious opportunities to attune themselves to what the natural environment might endeavor to impart concerning the cyclical rhythms of the seasons, the vitality of the local ecosystem, or even the more profound, intricate patterns that intrinsically link all forms of life, connect all living things, It was within these celestial realms that Hera dedicated countless hours, scrutinizing the mortal world below with an unwavering focus that stemmed from boundless eons and a profound fascination with deciphering the intricate mechanisms of existence. She was not merely Zeus's consort, but a formidable goddess in her own right, revered for the protection of families and the preservation of societal harmony. As contemplation turns towards landscapes and voices, one is drawn back to that pivotal moment when Echo's innate talent for captivating discourse caught the attention of divine powers, prompting reflection on what the narrative reveals about the intricate interplay between communication, truth, and loyalty. One might imagine themselves perched upon a marble terrace on Mount Olympus, gazing upon the world of mortals unfurling beneath like an intricate tapestry. From this exalted vantage point, it becomes possible to discern patterns imperceptible from the terrestrial plane, how rivers interweave disparate territories, how mountain ranges delineate inherent frontiers, and how human settlements congregate near vital provisions such as springs and fertile valleys. Zeus, conversely, maintained a divergent engagement with the mortal realm. While Hera scrutinized dispassionately from afar, Zeus favored immediate, intimate participation. He would frequently metamorphose into myriad guises, perhaps a potent bull, an elegant swan, or a dazzling shower of golden light, and descend to engage personally with mortals, particularly mortal women. From her elevated perspective, Hera could readily perceive recurring motifs of conduct that the individuals involved might not recognize within themselves. She observed when marriages were flourishing and when they were faltering. She noted how communities navigated discord and how they commemorated triumphs. She accorded specific scrutiny to questions of fidelity and trust, perhaps because her own sacred union involved unremitting trials on precisely those fronts. These frequent forays by Zeus engendered perpetual discord between the divine couple. Zeus interpreted them as inherent manifestations of his inquisitiveness and dynamism. Hera, however, perceived them as transgressions against their sacred union and potentially destabilizing to the societal equilibrium she diligently preserved. The chasm between them was not merely individual, but ideational, a core divergence concerning the obligations inherent in authority and rank. Echo, a nymph of the wild, found herself entangled within the nexus of this celestial conjugal contention. Though at first, she likely remained oblivious to the broader ramifications of her actions, she resided amidst the untamed wilderness where Zeus often elected to conduct his escapades. She possessed an inherently gregarious and vigilant nature, protective of the assemblage of minor deities and human beings who shared those verdant spaces. Envision these pivotal meetings. Hera materializing within a sylvan glade with the singular determination of someone pursuing ascent, and Echo emerging from the verdant foliage with a cordial salutation and instantaneous captivation with whatever Hera might wish to discuss. Are you seeking someone? How fascinating. You know, I was just pondering how we ascertain individuals' whereabouts and whether we are attracted to locales because of who might be present, or if we are truly drawn to the places themselves. Whenever Hera would arrive in these locations, evidently seeking her errant consort, Echo's initial inclination was probably unadorned cordiality. Here was a visitor who appeared distressed or troubled, and Echo possessed the rhetorical prowess to provide diversion and solace. It was instinctive to involve Hera in the kind of captivating, circuitous discourse that might ameliorate her disposition and foster a sense of ease. Yet, from Hera's perspective, these delightful conversations exhibited a dubious regularity. Every time she endeavored to apprehend Zeus's whereabouts, she encountered Echo. And every discourse with Echo persisted precisely until sense dissipated and quests proved unproductive. Whether Echo was intentionally shielding Zeus or simply being innately gregarious, the consequence was identical: an impediment to Hera's endeavors to exact marital reckoning. The retribution Hera meted out mirrored her perception of the precise impediment Echo personified. The issue was not that Echo was malevolent or duplicitous. In fact, she was probably utterly genuine in her discursive overtures. The core problem was that her talent for captivating discourse was being utilized, whether consciously or unconsciously, to obstruct genuine dialogue. Echo's conversation style was probably authentically captivating, replete with unforeseen linkages and profound insights that rendered mundane subjects novel and worthy of scrutiny. The sort of discourse that causes one to forfeit temporal awareness because one is reveling in the collaborative intellectual journey. Consequently, Hera's anathema was meticulously tailored. Echo would preserve her melodious tones and her innate communicative impulse, but she would forfeit the capacity to commence dialogue or articulate novel concepts. She could solely reiterate others' pronouncements, and exclusively with the concluding syllables of their utterances. The curse elucidates certain aspects of Hera's conception of equity, rather than merely rendering Echo entirely mute or inflicting a retribution disconnected from her deeds. Hera selected a repercussion, preserving the nexus between the transgression and the recompense. Echo had employed discourse to obfuscate verity. Thus, she would forfeit the aptitude to steer dialogues, but preserve the capacity to mirror and retort. This punishment metamorphosed Echo from an individual capable of guiding and orchestrating conversations into someone who was wholly reliant upon external agents for the substance and trajectory of discourse. It also meant that her responses would often seem enigmatic or fragmented, since she could only reiterate vestiges of what was said to her. From Hera's perspective, this probably seemed like an equitable settlement that ameliorated the particular issue while permitting Echo's continued subsistence in her natural environment. However, the chastisement further illuminated the intricacy of evaluating circumstances where individuals possess convoluted motivations, or where benevolent aspirations yield deleterious outcomes. Echo might have sincerely harbored affection for both the Queen of the Gods and the King of Olympus, and sought to avert discord between them by providing diversion and solace to Hera, while affording Zeus leisure to circumvent dispute. From Echo's perspective, her discursive intercessions might have appeared as an act of conciliation, an endeavor to spare all parties from distressing episodes and uphold equilibrium. She may not have entirely apprehended that eschewing challenging dialogues can sometimes exacerbate foundational issues rather than ameliorate them. There is also a profound observation within the narrative concerning the divergent manners in which celestial entities and terrestrial inhabitants encounter repercussions. For Hera, the punishment of Echo was probably a solitary minor occurrence in the pervasive, unceasing struggle of preserving equilibrium and exacting responsibility in a world where her consort's conduct engendered perpetual disarray. The story suggests that Hera grasped a crucial insight about the interplay between discourse and verity. Benevolently purposed dialogues that habitually deter individuals from confronting genuine dilemmas are ultimately unconstructive, even when they are pleasurable and transiently reassuring. But for Echo, the metamorphosis proved absolute and immutable, influencing each future engagement she would have for the entirety of her being. The story refrains from portraying Hera as malevolent or inequitable, but it does underscore how deeds perceived as rational from a singular viewpoint can have calamitous repercussions from an alternative standpoint. The chastisement could have imparted a profound lesson to Echo about the distinction between discourse that caters to the requirements of others and dialogue that, however charmingly, functions to circumvent arduous verities. Yet, it exacted the price of relinquishing the inherent endowment that had been pivotal to her essence and her mode of engaging with existence. As one remains positioned upon this hallowed marble observation deck, gazing down at the world where these mythic sagas unfolded, one might contemplate current dialogues that involve analogous strains between benevolence and veracity, between shielding individuals from unpleasant actualities and assisting them in confronting indispensable facts. After the anathema manifested its dominion, Echo had to assimilate wholly novel modalities of engagement in the communal existence of her cohort. She could no longer proffer solace via circuitous dialogues or impart insights that enabled others to perceive commonplace elements from fresh perspectives. Instead, she had to discover significance and communion through attentive audition and considered rejoinder to what others shared with her. How does one equilibrate the urge to provide reassurance and diversion with the duty to foster genuine discourse, even when the verity could prove discomforting for all participants? Shifting from inquiries concerning veracity and discourse, let us conclude our contemplation by perambulating thoughtfully amidst Hellenic conceptions regarding juvenescence and pulchritude, and why they instituted structured customs for venerating and safeguarding these ephemeral attributes. One is now standing in the atrium of a palaestra in classical Athens, likely within the 5th century before the Common Era. The space is more expansive than one might anticipate, not merely a singular edifice, but a comprehensive complex encompassing physical training zones, ablution chambers, verdant enclosures, and shaded promenades where people can congregate for discourse and tutelage. The auroral radiance penetrates the venerable olive groves planted around the courtyard's perimeter, delineating ephemeral tapestries of luminosity and umbra across the pallid lithic plains. One can discern the subdued cadences of quotidian readiness, aquatic streams decanting into receptacles, the gentle abrasion of currying implements undergoing purification, and the hushed tones of dialogue as individuals commence their assembly for the diurnal undertakings. The young men of ancient Greece would assemble at the gymnasium to commence their daily regimen. This revered institution was not merely a venue for corporeal exertion. It was a crucible where young Greek men engaged in what might be termed a veneration of youth and physical perfection, though the Hellenes themselves perceived these practices through a distinct philosophical lens, one that could profoundly challenge modern preconceptions. The daily regimen within the gymnasium meticulously mirrored this profound understanding. Each morning, the young men would converge and embark upon a period of methodical preparation, imbued with an almost ceremonial reverence for precise execution. They would divest themselves of their everyday attire and meticulously anoint their skin with olive oil, a practice rooted not in superficial vanity, but in the practical necessity of safeguarding their bodies against the sun's harsh rays and the wind's abrasive touch during their outdoor physical pursuits. When contemporary minds encounter the phrase cult of youth and beauty, the immediate association often leans towards superficiality or an excessive preoccupation with external appearance. However, the Greek philosophical approach was considerably more intricate and, in many respects, profoundly pragmatic. They regarded physical attractiveness and youthful vigor as potent manifestations of more profound attributes. Robust health, unwavering discipline, an exquisite equilibrium between the intellect and the physique, and the profound self-esteem that blossoms from nurturing one's being with the same diligent care afforded to a cherished garden. The very act of oil application transcended mere individual grooming, evolving into a communal ritual. Comrades would assist one another in reaching less accessible areas of the body, and this shared endeavor fostered opportunities for hushed dialogues concerning the forthcoming day, shared anxieties, or the intricate philosophical quandaries that had captivated their thoughts since their last encounter. In this environment, physical attentiveness was inextricably interwoven with emotional resonance and intellectual communion. Following the thorough anointing of their skin, the young men would dedicate their time to a diverse array of physical exercises: fleet-footed running, intense wrestling, the dynamic art of discus throwing, and the precision of javelin practice. Yet, these activities were not fundamentally driven by competitive rivalry. The overarching objective was the cultivation of bodies that were robust, supple, and imbued with an inherent grace, capable of navigating the world with unshakable confidence and fluid ease. One might observe a particular cadre diligently practicing discus throwing within a secluded corner of the courtyard. Their concentration is not fixated upon achieving maximum distance or pinpoint accuracy, but rather upon the intrinsic elegance of the throwing motion itself, the nuanced rotation of the torso, the seamless transfer of mass from one foot to the other, the sweeping, fluid arc of the arm as it liberates the disc. Each throw is immediately succeeded by thoughtful discourse and gentle, constructive critiques, with the paramount emphasis placed upon impeccable form and rhythmic fluidity, rather than on quantifiable outcomes. This pervasive emphasis on elegant movement extended far beyond the confines of structured physical drills. The young men assiduously practiced their deportment, their manner of walking, sitting, and standing, in ways that eloquently conveyed an air of unwavering confidence and composed self-possession. They assiduously cultivated the ability to navigate complex social interactions with the identical, meticulous attention to posture and rhythmic flow that they applied to their athletic endeavors. The ancient Greeks held a profound conviction that one's physical bearing exerted a direct influence upon one's cognitive processes and emotional landscape. An individual who moved with inherent grace and acute self-awareness was considered more predisposed to lucid thought and to engage with others in a spirit of magnanimity. Consequently, physical discipline was regarded as an indispensable bedrock for the burgeoning development of both intellectual prowess and moral rectitude. Subsequent to their period of exercise, the young men engaged in elaborate bathing rituals, which constituted a pivotal element of Greek perceptions concerning beauty and meticulous self-care. This intricate process commenced with the employment of strigils, crescent-shaped metallic implements specifically designed to meticulously scrape away the accumulated olive oil, perspiration, and grime from the epidermal surface. This was not merely a utilitarian cleansing, but an integral component of a comprehensive skincare regimen that left the physique remarkably smooth and radiantly healthy. The scraping procedure was typically performed collaboratively, with individuals working in pairs or small cohorts, friends aiding one another in reaching awkward areas and collectively ensuring that the cleansing was both exhaustive and gentle. Much like the preliminary application of oil, this communal act fostered opportunities for subdued dialogue and reciprocal attentiveness, thereby significantly reinforcing the bonds of social camaraderie. The concluding phase of this meticulous self-care regimen involved the judicious application of fragrant oils and, on occasion, delicate cosmetics. Crucially, these were employed not with the intention of concealing or fundamentally altering one's appearance, but rather to accentuate and laud the innate comeliness that had been brought forth through rigorous physical activity and diligent purification. The ultimate aspiration was to present oneself as the most refined iteration of one's natural being, vibrant, hale, and demonstrably well-tended. Following the thorough cleansing with the strigil, the bathing continued with water of varying temperatures, initially warm, then progressing to cooler water, sometimes culminating in a swift immersion in frigid water, which imparted a luminous glow and invigorated sensation to the skin. These deliberate shifts in temperature were widely believed to significantly enhance circulatory function and fortify the body's inherent capacity to acclimate to fluctuating environmental conditions. However, the veneration of youth and beauty extended far beyond these daily physical regimens. The Greeks also instituted formal religious and societal ceremonies specifically designed to commemorate the zenith of physical maturation and concurrently to acknowledge its transient essence. The selection procedure for these distinguished ceremonial roles was approached with utmost solemnity, necessitating meticulous observation and appraisal of potential candidates. Over time, the community's criteria evolved beyond mere conventional attractiveness, encompassing a discerning search for intrinsic qualities such as innate grace, emotional equilibrium, and a profound sense of self-assurance derived from genuine self-respect, rather than from superficial vanity or unwarranted arrogance. Young men and women who perfectly embodied the Hellenic ideals of aesthetic appeal and physical perfection might be specially chosen to participate in sacred processions, bearing revered artifacts, or to lead intricate ceremonial dances. These esteemed roles conferred honor not solely upon the individual's personal comeliness, but more significantly, upon the community's profound appreciation for the harmonious vitality that youth intrinsically symbolizes. Those selected for these prominent positions fully comprehended that they were representing a concept far grander than their individual selves. They functioned as living embodiments of the community's cherished principles regarding health, rigorous discipline, and the quintessential relationship between corporeal development and spiritual cultivation. Concurrently, the Greeks possessed a profound cognizance of the ephemeral nature of youth and physical comeliness. Their celebrations of these qualities were invariably tinged with the profound understanding that the relentless march of time alters every individual, and that the ultimate objective was not to desperately cling to a youthful visage, but rather to harness the inherent vigor and self-assurance of youth to cultivate enduring virtues of character and profound sagacity. This nuanced understanding engendered practices that might strike a contemporary observer as rather unexpected. Elder men, who themselves had once been lauded for their youthful beauty, were accorded immense respect for their pivotal role in guiding younger individuals through the intricate transition from an over-reliance on physical attractiveness to the cultivation of deeper wellsprings of inner confidence and meaningful societal contribution. They firmly believed that an individual who had diligently learned to appreciate and nurture their physical self during their formative years would be significantly better equipped to discover profound sources of contentment and self-worth as their physique inevitably transformed over time. The rigorous discipline and meticulous attention to health cultivated within the gymnasium would serve them as invaluable assets throughout their entire existence, even as their outward appearance underwent its natural evolution. Greek literary works and artistic creations from this historical epoch vividly portray this intricate comprehension of beauty and the natural progression of aging. Rather than perpetuating the illusion that youth endures perpetually, Hellenic artists celebrated the distinctive allure inherent in each successive stage of human existence. The vibrant dynamism of adolescence, the seasoned self-assurance of middle age, and the venerable sagacity characteristic of advanced years. The gymnasium functioned as a natural crucible where these invaluable intergenerational relationships could organically flourish. Elder men would generously impart their extensive knowledge of exercise methodologies, refined personal care regimens, and crucial social graces to their younger counterparts, while the youthful men, in turn, infused the environment with their boundless energy and infectious zeal, thereby maintaining the older men's vital connection to the invigorating spirit of youth. As the day gradually wanes and the tranquil hush descends upon the gymnasium, one might discern how the soft, ambient light of late afternoon bestows a resplendent golden luminescence upon the skin of the young men concluding their daily regimens. There resides an undeniable intrinsic beauty in physiques that have been assiduously cared for and rigorously exercised. Skin that radiates health and cleanliness, movements that exude both assurance and refined grace. Perhaps their ancient philosophy offers a valuable paradigm for those of us navigating our contemporary relationships with aesthetic ideals, the inevitable process of aging and personal well-being. Instead of perceiving youth and beauty as ephemeral treasures to be desperately clutched, we might instead conceptualize them as precious endowments to be fully cherished during their tenure, serving as fundamental groundwork for cultivating the discipline and self-respect that can sustain us throughout the expansive odyssey of a fully realized life. Moreover, there is an undeniable serenity in contemplating such beauty, without succumbing to the anxiety of its perpetual preservation. The Greeks appear to have ingeniously discovered a method to laud physical perfection, while simultaneously embracing its transient nature, to judiciously invest in health and outward appearance, without descending into desperation concerning the inexorable march of aging and transformative change. As one leisurely retraces their steps homeward through the ancient thoroughfares of Athens during the twilight hours, enveloped by the gentle murmurs of a city gradually yielding to the embrace of night, a profound contemplation might arise. What would it truly entail to inhabit a civilization that celebrated beauty unburdened by shame, acknowledged the reality of aging without succumbing to despair, and regarded meticulous physical care as an essential cornerstone for the lifelong endeavor of evolving into one's most complete and altruistic self? What contemporary daily practices might enable us to forge that delicate equilibrium between appreciating the ephemeral gifts of youth and conscientiously preparing for the distinct blessings that accompany experience, profound wisdom, and the more profound beauty that blossoms when we have cultivated the capacity to care for ourselves and for others throughout all the varied seasons of a human existence. One might often contemplate the intricate tapestry of a human existence, pondering whether it truly encompasses the full spectrum of experiences, much like the cyclical progression of the natural world seasons. This evocative metaphor suggests a journey from the burgeoning vitality of spring, symbolizing infancy and the blossoming of youth, through the vibrant energy and industriousness of summer, representing the zenith of adulthood and its manifold responsibilities. Subsequently, the contemplative hues of autumn emerge, signifying a period of mature reflection, the harvesting of wisdom, and a gradual, graceful transition. Finally, the serene stillness of winter arrives, often associated with advanced age, a time for quiet introspection, and the eventual culmination of one's earthly tenure. The profound query then arises: does this universally understood four-part sequence adequately capture every nuance, every unexpected turn, and every profound shift that defines the unique trajectory of an individual's life? Or are there dimensions beyond this elegant, yet perhaps simplified, seasonal framework?